welcome to Faith and Whatever, your weekly source for faith and whatever we find interesting, and hopefully you do too. This week in our religion topic, James has got some stuff that's probably going to depress a lot of us.
Wow. Okay. I was going to say some juicy nuggets, but...
Well, I think you're going to just wreck some people's
let's
perception.
just get this out in the front. Y'all going to hate us after this.
That's what I feel like. I feel like there's going to be a lot of... I don't want to judge anyone. There's a lot of people who are less familiar with the Bible, but like to pick and choose things that they think sounds really cool, and might not necessarily be that cool.
Yeah, but you know what? When it comes down to it, it's the pastor's fault on this one.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm a pastor saying that, by the way.
That's good. That's good. Put it on the blame it on those who teach. That's fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Isn't that what the Bible does?
James does. This James and the biblical James.
One and the same. Not really.
Not really in that regard. Okay, so the religion topic for this week is all about some biblical passages that famously get misused. Now, we did a religion segment a few weeks ago on the unbiblical things that Christians believe, and that was ideas that Christians thought were biblical, but really aren't. This is a little different. These are statements that get made in the Bible, but get misused in popular discourse.
Right, so other ones weren't even in the Bible.
Yeah, those weren't even in the Bible. These ones actually are.
But people are using them incorrectly.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
All right, so probably the first one is one of my favorites as far as misused passages go, and that's Jeremiah 29:11. God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you," and so forth. And this is that passage that usually gets cited when it's talking about when people are speaking in terms of believing God has some kind of micromanaged plan for my or your life.
Yeah, there's a lot of people with this is their favorite verse.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, and it's
on their mirror in the morning when they get up, so that they know that, hey, no matter how crazy my life gets, God knows.
Yeah.
My plan.
Here's a technical term for some of you that you may not know: hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the depending on who you talk to, it's the process of interpretation, and not only interpretation, but what do we do once we have interpreted the Bible? And an important small aspect of hermeneutics, an important small step, I should say, is when you have a pronoun. Pronouns are I, you, me, they, right? These are pronouns. Make sure you know who the pronoun is referring to. And the pronoun in Jeremiah is you, Y-O-U, in English, when you read it in English.
Is I also a pronoun?
It is a pronoun, and I is God, but I don't think anybody's confused about who the I is in this passage. But the problem is how people interpret the you. Is the you the reader, the person reading the Bible right now? Well, I would contend that in Jeremiah 29:11, that the you is not you. It's the first audience of Jeremiah. And who was the first audience of Jeremiah? Israel, as they went into exile and then continued to exist in exile. The great Babylonian conquerors had come, taken some of them off their land and into exile to live in Babylon. And there's a great deal of despair and distress and anxiety and all kinds of things we can't even imagine. And to that, God says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, and so forth. And what's being said here is, what is he going to do for those Israelites in exile? Not for every believer who has ever believed.
My question to you is why, and this may be more of a pop cultural thing, why are we so surprised by that? Very little of the Old Testament is targeted to its reader as guidelines to its reader, as opposed to maybe there are some rules and regulations in the Old Testament that would be, had that been, if you participate in that covenant, then yeah, I guess those would be for you. But for the rest of the Old Testament, wouldn't you say a small percentage is actually you are the audience as a reader?
Well, I understand what you're saying. I would word it a little differently. Most of the Old Testament and New Testament is directed towards the reader, but when I say reader, I mean the original reader.
Right.
So there's a distinction we can make: intended audience and unintended audience. An intended audience is when whoever is writing, that's the audience in mind. If I write a letter to Garrett's in my mind. If I write a letter to my employers are in my mind. If I write a letter to my family while I'm off far away somewhere, my family's in mind, or my church, or whoever. But that doesn't stop anybody from reading that letter if it gets in their hands, right? That would be the unintended audience. Anybody else who reads it are the unintended audience. The prophets are speaking to an audience, and often it's the people alive around their days. It's for Jeremiah, the Israelites. And the intended audience, the you there, is for them.
So why don't I just throw out my Bible?
Because we can still learn from it, right?
But so is the problem? I would disagree with you a little bit here in where the problem lies. Not so much in the you, but in the idea of plans. Because I think it's a fair lesson to say God's faithful to His people.
Right.
Right. I think we'd all agree with that. But I think it goes back to you were saying the micromanaging. Like people use this to assure themselves that, I don't know, traffic's going to be good, or whatever tiny detail of their life is going to go their way. I think if we can take the lesson that God is faithful to His people, I think that's a fair thing to extract from this.
Yeah, I would
A large
agree.
part of it, you can solve this whole problem if you just include verse 10. So let me read for you fully, starting with verse 11 and a few verses, and then let's add verse 10.
Okay.
So famously, people quote, "For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. Then when you call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. When you search for me, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, says the Lord." And it keeps going from there, right?
Okay.
Now that sounds wonderful and directed to every believer if you read it that way. Throw in verse 10, frames everything else
Here
differently.
we go.
"For thus says the Lord, only when Babylon's 70 years are completed will I visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For surely I know the plans I have for you," and so forth. What's the context here? It's in the context of the Babylonian exile.
Right.
It's what's going to happen when these 70 years of exile are completed. Will God do what He's explaining in this passage? So the context of the passage, everything it's teaching, is contextually those 70 years in exile. And obviously, He's not speaking, again, for Chris's point here, He's not speaking to individuals. He's speaking to the whole people, the plans He has for the nation of Israel.
Isn't this a constant thing, though, where we forget, or we focus on the micro where God's focusing on the macro?
Right.
I mean, kind of whether it's this verse or almost any other subject in life.
Yeah. And things get a little touchy here, but if I'm speaking in general terms, I've always believed this. God's great plans is for the church. The gift to each individual is being part of the church. For Christianity, that is.
I think I saw this Bible verse over the picture of a martyr once.
Yeah. I can see the irony in us really liking that verse. I mean, to Chris's point, though, this is probably not what everyone is doing, but couldn't someone say, wow, I like how God took care of the Israelites here, even though they failed just like I fail, and even though that they disappointed Him like I will, He still had good plans for them. So I'm going to make this one of my favorite verses to remind me of how God followed through with His promise, even though we don't follow through with our promises.
Right.
So could someone, would that be, maybe not correct audience, but that be a accurate way to have this verse teach us something about God?
Yeah, well, I would say that where you'd be taking it correctly is to learn from it that God fulfills His promises. But now check your presuppositions about what those promises are. Did He ever come to you through a prophet and tell you He has specific promises, particularly for your life, that then you can trust those promises? Or has He always given promises for the greater church, for salvation, that you can be part of, that you can be folded into and have confidence in those things?
Right.
But that's different than a micromanaged plan for your life.
According to the article, we're looking at second most shared Bible verse on, what was the site?
Oh, this is, by the way, faithstreet.com. They were they influenced this religion topic, by the way.
Second most shared Bible verse on Bible Gateway or something like that. So I think it's kind of ingrained. Would you say that, gosh, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but this is kind of setting the precedent for the rest of the verses, that it's kind of ingrained in Christian culture. I mean, this verse itself has now become, second most shared verse on a huge Bible website. Christians must actually perceive this as a fundamental truth of Christianity.
Right.
Would you think that's true?
Exactly what? That
That
God has a
God-
plan for my life particularly.
uh-huh.
I think so. I think there's a desire. I almost said an unspoken, but it's actually quite a spoken desire that I'm going to have a direct connection to God, and this is often spoken in terms of why I don't need a church or a priest or some kind of institutional religion, because I'm going to have a personal relationship with God, one-on-one, direct, and it's part of this requiring that. How do I want to word it? It's almost requiring for something to be true, I need to be at the center of it, right? I need to have a central connection to God, a direct connection. And I do believe we can all pray and pray to God. But even in the New Testament, prayer is a community event. People individually pray, but often they pray together, right?
Right.
And there is a precedent for the body, for the church in the New Testament, that God's plans are often for his people, not for his persons.
Okay.
Right? And I think that's a very different thing.
Yeah.
And the joy of being in salvation is entering the community of salvation and to be part of God's plans for that community,
Yeah.
his great plans for that community.
Yeah. I think it touches on why this verse has become to be honest, the issue that it is because people, instead of being involved in the community to teach us about different various parts of the Bible, to read your Bible fairly thoroughly and in a way that looking for ways to learn from it, not verse by verse, which one applies to me. People have seen this verse somewhere or read it somewhere or heard it mentioned as someone's favorite verse, and it just snowballed onto that this verse exists on its own, has become a Christian foundational belief almost, as opposed to reading it in context, learning from it, and taking it for what it is.
But do you think there's a danger in cynicism? Familiarity breeds contempt, right? And this is something I've seen a lot growing up in Christian school and in church, where people study and study and study, and they get to this point of, it's almost like they enjoy tearing these kinds of things down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
And because I know someone personally, and this verse has literally kept them alive,
Right.
and through some difficult times in their life. And so I kind of, as much as I do love peeing in people's Cheerios, so to speak, there's kind of I feel like a danger for those of us who have grown up with a lot more knowledge, maybe, or have studied more.
Well,
Yeah.
there's an addiction for those who study a lot. There's a temptation, a possible addiction to deconstructing, taking great joy in always deconstructing people's beliefs and giving them nothing to construct upon, which is any deconstruction, the goal should be construction after that. And so I'd agree with you. There is danger in that. I think, I don't know the person you're speaking of, Chris, but I think there was, if given the opportunity, if somebody was taking the responsibility to be that person's pastor, it would behoove that person not just to say, well, you're reading this passage wrong, but to say, but here's a more important and more realistic and more biblically oriented thing for you to find your footing upon. And so not just to sort of take the carpet out from underneath,
Right.
but to add a better carpet, if that makes sense. And sometimes we just take too much joy in the deconstruction. We never get around to the
Yeah,
construction.
that's not fair. That's not the goal of a pastor
Yeah.
or
But I
a
feel like,
mentor.
especially, and I'm not specifically criticizing this article or its author,
Right.
but kind of on the internet, especially in a lot of Christian circles, there is a lot of that joy, and it's become kind of the Christian clickbait.
Right.
Of the
I agree to an extent. My fear, one of the things I'm really trying to teach my students right now is that the Bible is narrative, and it's not necessarily the greatest way to build your faith by kind of piecemealing even sections of the Bible without the greater understanding of the context. And so this story very well could be just as important to someone, but it'll also probably build a slightly more accurate picture of who God is by understanding it in context and getting just as much out of the story of the Israelites in exile
Right,
than as
being
opposed,
delivered.
yeah, and then as opposed as to what a specific verse means to me.
Yeah.
We do that a lot, and I think in some verses that is totally an acceptable way to look at it. If Matthew 28:18 it like fires you up to go evangelize, it's a command, and it's a 2-verse command. I think that in a lot of ways, that is in that way can be pretty acceptable to take that as your favorite verse and inspire you. But when you take things literally out of a narrative of a historical occurrence and take that because you like the way that it sounds, there's a danger that someday someone not like the three of us are going to deconstruct that
Yeah.
and say
Yeah.
that that's completely wrong context. What were you thinking?
Yeah. And outside of what God has done through the death, burial, and resurrection, outside of that, the most important thing in Christianity is the Christian church, the community.
Yeah.
That sort of needing to lean upon something, instead of needing to lean upon a very individualistic reading of the Bible, lean on the community. That's what it's there for. I mean, a major aspect of the church is to be a help to every individual of the church. But you need the church to be part of your life for that to happen. And so, I mean, that's why the church is important. That's why the Christianity isn't a go it alone sort of faith. That it's a community-based faith. And yeah, sometimes that community makes terrible mistakes, but that's where we need good people there to sharpen that community, and we need good people to bring to exude Jesus' joy and salvation and love upon that community. So if you think you're better than half your church community, then be the better half, right? And bring the goodness to your community. Be that thing that lifts up that community in that case. Another passage on this list is, I'm going to skip one to mix it up a bit, is ask and it will be given to you. And of course, this list cites it as it appears in Luke 11:9. It also appears in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. The chapter and verse are escaping me. It's in chapter 7, but I can't remember the verse. And so people read this out of context, and the sort of reading it, what that results in is people thinking, whatever I ask for in prayer, especially if I ask with enough faith and with enough passion, well, it's practically guaranteed to me. A funny anecdotal story of this is I remember back in 7th grade, maybe, praying so passionately for a PlayStation 1.
I think I've heard a lot of televangelists use this.
Right. But Garrett, any thoughts on this practice and where it comes from?
Yeah. Talk about dangerously taking a verse out of context. I would like to think that even in the best case scenario, someone is using this not for material things, but maybe for strength and courage, and even within the Christian context of being a good Christian or a godly person, you would imagine that God will only give you those things that would help you accomplish that, not selfish things. When we're young and we don't understand who God is and His plan for us, we could totally take this the wrong way. But probably what happens is that we hear this, and then when we don't have a faith constructed of better pictures of who God is, then we think that this can mean whatever we want it to mean.
Yeah. And I haven't worked out all my thoughts on the proper way to interpret this passage. I know what I don't think it is, but exactly what it is, I still am constructing my ideas. But I would say that, when you look at the context of this passage, it's Jesus is speaking at this point in Galilee. He's speaking to very poor rural folk. Obviously, as he's speaking to his audience, I don't think he's trying to convey to them, if you want the ancient world Rolls Royce, pray enough for it. Or even if you want to be fat and happy, pray for it.
Some new rims for my chariot.
Right, because these things are just not even on the table for them. And if you look just in the same chapter, but just before this passage, he's giving an example of a prayer to pray, and he's saying praying for daily bread, meaning bread that's going to sustain your life, not for the luxury of overabundance of bread or something like that.
Yeah, literally just sustenance. Daily.
Right, and that he's saying that. And in that context, what this seems to really mean is not that any luxury is available to us or even any convenience or comfort, but that God will sustain us, that the sustainable things that we ask for will be given to us, the things that will sustain us. And ultimately we all die too. So at some point that runs out. And what sustain means is in an eternal sense in a heavenly place. But that still is losing our life here on earth, right? And so we kind of have to sort of check some of the, I guess my fear is this being used for frivolous things. This assumption becoming, the assumption being that this passage teaches us that any convenience can be at our fingertips if we pray enough, or any comfort can be at our fingertips, when really it's about the sustainment of life and being that God sees to those things, not to our luxuries necessarily.
Yeah. It's kind of a prosper gospel. Is that what it's called? What do you call it?
Well, I call it the Cash Cadillacs No Colds gospel.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen this be used in the context of...
You're talking about the prosperity gospel.
Prosperity, that's right.
Yeah.
Close. If you've seen this used in the context of God wants you to have all of these nice things, and here's this verse that supports that, that's a pretty poor depiction of God. There are so many verses that go almost exactly opposite of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the definition of taking a verse out of context and using it for your own benefit.
We'll do one more to round out this video, one that I find to be very important, because as much as I like the positive message this gets spun into, it really isn't that. And this one kind of hurts me because I do like the way it gets spun as far as what it can do emotionally for people.
You like the way people misconstrue the original meaning?
Yeah, and that's I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I see people use this as a in the context of convincing themselves that they can do anything, right? That they can take on any challenge. Right. And I love people having the passion to try new things and try to take on new things and trying to achieve great things. The fear is that if you think you can do anything because the Bible has told you can do anything, and then you fail, the outcome of that is damaged faith. Yeah. Because you were convinced from Philippians 4:13 that I can do anything through God. And you get those, I can't remember who they were called. Remember the guys that would weightlift for Jesus? And this was their
power team.
Yeah. This was like one of their major slogans, right? I can lift 400 pounds through him who strengthens me, right? Kind of thing.
Ripping phone books in half.
Have you ever seen this used? Let's explore this. Have you ever seen this misused for all the best reasons in your days in ministry or just in your personal life?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's used to encourage someone who has trepidation or fear and anxiety about something.
Right.
I don't know if I've ever used it in that context. I've spoken a lot about that. I've done a whole lesson on timidity versus anxiety versus fear. I wouldn't use this verse to counteract that, but I think that it could be, and I think that seems to be a fairly innocent way to encourage someone who's scared to do something that as maybe their mentors or people who want to encourage them knows that they can do it, and knowing that God is strengthening you might give them the encouragement to complete that task or do that thing that they need to do. So that seems like a innocent way to use that. Maybe that's what you're referring to.
Right. Chris?
Not really. I mean, it's popular with Christian athletes, obviously. Very popular.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. I'm kind of with you on this. It's like, yeah, I know the context and I know what it's getting at, but if it encourages someone, and I kind of feel like let them have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would hope that the thing they're trying to build up strength for is something that they, as a Christian, know is glorifying to God.
Yeah. And for the person who's asking right now, well, what does it mean? What's the argument here? Why doesn't it mean that? This is a prison epistle, Philippians. Paul's writing from prison. A lot of the fact that he's in prison and might be executed soon runs through the whole life of this letter in Philippians. And what he is trying to say is that in this situation where he might die, he can run that course because he will be strengthened to the end, even if the end is death. Right. That he knows God will see him through, even through the execution. Right. Or maybe through being not being found guilty of the charges that are brought against him, and then being renewed to the church and renewed to mission work. Even if that's the case, God will see him through to that. Right. But the idea here is it's not that Paul is saying, well, if I want to do this one day, I know I can.
Right.
But it's that anything that gets dumped on me,
Right.
and that I can work through that situation even if the end is death, because God is going to strengthen me to the end.
Right. It's like his recipients were asking him, Paul, how are you doing this?
Right.
How can you be so faithful and yet in prison and possibly executed? We don't understand. What is your trick to get through this? How is that possible? And then he just replies simply with, oh, I can do all things.
Yeah. And exactly. And I would say like a good...
I can get through all of this.
Yeah, I would say that good is the wrong word, but an appropriate application is, like I've had a lot of family and a lot of friends struggle through cancer. And the idea is some lived, some died, but for those who believe, God strengthened them and got them through it. God kept them going until the end, and that's what this is about.
Right.
That they didn't say, I'm going to get cancer and beat cancer, right? I'm going to defeat cancer as if it was some goal. Cancer was dumped upon them.
Yeah.
And now they're going to have to deal with that reality, and I can get through all things through him who strengthens me.
Right. So we apologize if you have to get some tattoos taken off, and or the meaning of your tattoo is now completely ruined. We can probably recommend a good tattoo artist for you to put a more appropriate verse on
Remember, cover-ups are cheaper than laser.
That's right. That's right.
So get a bigger one.
Maybe there's a better verse in Philippians that you want to put in there. I'm not really sure.
Just add the context of the passage.
Yeah, just add some above and some below, and then you'll be good. If you have any other verses that you think are often misused, or if you disagree with us, or if you just want to suggest verses that can be used fairly universally to encourage other believers, we'd love to hear those. Please like and subscribe to our videos. You can comment with those verses right here on this video, and you can check out everything at faithandwhatever.com. See ya.